This week on Quality Digest, it's lonely at the top. Being the top dog comes with its share of negatives, often on a very personal level. Today we talk to Kelly Graves, CEO of Internal Business Solutions and author of the book, The Management and Employee Development Review, about tackling the problems of being a leader. You want to hear more about that, so join us in 30 seconds. Welcome back to Quality Digest Live. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest. And you know, we often think that once you reach the upper echelons of a company, as the CEO, the president, the vice president, that you have arrived. It's all just peaches and cream from that point on. And maybe it is for a lot of people, for some people, but not everyone. Many CEOs and top leaders struggle with what it means when the buck stops with you. How do they handle the anxiety and even loneliness of being the key decision maker? And today on our show, we welcome back Kelly Graves, CEO of Internal Business Solutions and author of The Management and Employee Development Review. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for coming by the studio.
Great to see you again, Dirk. It's great to be back.
So, we don't think about that a lot. Is when you're at the very top of your company, the buck does stop with you, and I think some people relish that, and I think a lot of people just are energized by it, and this is really peaches and cream for them. This is great. They love what's going on there. But a lot of people, it's a lot of I guess lonely is the word you used, and I'm guessing that's because. Who do you talk to? You don't have necessarily a mentor above you in the company. Maybe you have somebody somewhere else, but it all lies with you, and that can be an interesting predicament, I think.
It really is. I think all leaders at all levels of an organization need to have an objective person that they talk with, whether that's a mentor inside the organization, a consultant, a coach on the outside, a trusted family member. It's so important to have that because being the number two person and being the number one person is totally different. I have worked with organizations where we had vice presidents that were moving into that CEO spot, and you thought they were going to be great, and yet when they got into that spot, they couldn't handle it. Because in all parts of the organization, you have a safety net. But when you're the CEO or the president or the director, the spotlight's on you and the safety net is removed. And that comes with a lot of pressure. I'd like to tell a story. I'm not a big believer in top 10 lists. I think people learn better with stories. And then from those stories, all the learning components fall out. I'd like to tell one about a CEO, organization I worked with, I don't know, 9 or 10 years ago, I guess. And this organization, a little backstory, this organization was about $37 million. They had about 90, maybe 95 employees. They were a manufacturing organization. And been in business for around 60, 65 years. I worked with the second generation. So the father had died, gave the business to, unfortunately, 3 sons. And the eldest son thought he was going to get the business. And literally on the deathbed, the father's deathbed, he says, "Number 2 son," which was the right decision, but it caused all kinds of problems within the organization. So that was problem number 1. I had been brought in because of the strife within the 3 brothers, and then once I was there, we started looking at the organization, and they got comfortable with me and said, "Yeah, why don't you come work with us a little bit more?" And so I'll start there with that. So we had the problem with the 3 brothers, and then within that we had. Organizationally, it was an older manufacturing plant, and they hadn't really updated all the equipment and the facilities. They would do a lot of patching, they would do maintenance, but they never went out and bought new equipment or totally rebuilt things. It was always on a patch job,
kind of kludged
which
together.
Which was really how the organization did things, on a shoestring at the last minute without firm decisions. And that just played itself out. So we had a manufacturing plant that wasn't being updated. On top of that, we had an aging management team. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's great to have maturity on the team. But what they didn't do is they didn't create the team underneath that. So they weren't really planning for the future in terms of, you know, the next level. And I think that's, you know, as leaders and managers, sometimes we can do the job, but it's our job to be constantly developing those underneath us. Because think about it, if you don't develop the people underneath you, then you can't move ahead. And I know we all know that on a theoretical level, but it's another thing to say, okay, I need to take time out of my week, every month to develop, you know, my 1, 2, 3, or 5 people.
And that's a problem. I think that's why it probably doesn't get done enough. It's like, oh, I don't have time to show somebody how to do this job. I just got to do the job, right?
Right. And that's one of the problems in organizations, and I run into with most all organizations, is firefighting mode. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying we have a fire, we have to put it out. But shortly, you know, in 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, you need to come back and say, okay, I fixed a symptom. I didn't fix the problem. What's the true problem? And then you have to really come back and address that. And so within that management team is they didn't plan for the future in terms of that. But also the key issue here was the CEO didn't make firm yes or no decisions. He had been raised with this management team, basically. People had been there for 20, 30, sometimes even 35 years. They'd grown up together. And so as I sat in on my first executive meeting or management meeting, they would go around the table and discuss problems, but there was never, there's a solution, this is when we're going to solve it, and this is what we're going to do to fix it. There was never any of that. So as I saw them go around the table and talk about problems with no real solutions or time frames, I said, okay, let's stop. Let's choose something that you have tried to achieve in the last few years but haven't been able to, and let's start off something small. Nothing huge. You know, basically they just needed to learn how to toss the ball back and forth. And apparently for around 8 to 10 years they had tried to clean up the facility. Now that seems pretty basic, but a manufacturing plant, you know, they had extra equipment, they had scrap, they had outdated templates and things, and so I said, okay, in the next 20 minutes, I want you to choose an area of the yard, now not a huge corner, just a corner. In the next 20 minutes, choose a corner, choose who is going to supply the manpower, which department, who's going to supply the equipment, because everything there was big and heavy, who's going to supply the equipment, and what day are you going to do it? You've got 20 minutes. And for the first, you know, few minutes, they were fine. They were talking, discussing. I said, okay, you've got 10 minutes left. That's when they realized, wait a minute, he actually means 20 minutes. He doesn't mean metaphorically. And he's expecting results. And I said, yeah, you need to find, you know, I went through what they had to do. And so I said, okay, you've got 5 minutes left. And they started freaking out. And they said, we can't do it. We need more time. I said, you got 5 minutes. Get on it. And they needed to be really pushed. It seems simple telling this story, but it really was pretty wild to watch. And so 2 minutes left, 1 minute left, they finally did it, and they were really beside themselves. Something as simple as this. And so I said, okay, next Thursday at 8 o'clock when we get here, these things need to be done. Have a nice week. Came back the next week, and it was amazing. Grown men were acting like children that just won their first baseball game at 13 years old. They were literally giddy. They had never really set, here's a goal, here's a time frame, this is what we're going to do, and do it. And they did. They achieved it. And that's where we started to rebuild that organization. And one of the keys is one, laying out those simple facts. So one is, don't set a goal and say, in June or July or middle of next week, do this. Put a date and a time on it. Be very specific, and that way people know that I've got something due at this date, this time, and then if they can't get it done, let's renegotiate, but put a very firm time on it. It's better to say yes or no, but never maybe. So decision by indecision is still a decision, and so many companies do that. And that was one of the problems with this CEO, is he wanted to be friends with everyone and he didn't want to step on toes. And that's the hard part about being the leader, is you are going to step on toes.
So, but how did that make him? How did that make him feel? Was he afraid of stepping on toes because he was afraid of feeling isolated, or like we said at the beginning, lonely? You know, that these are, I'm assuming, family members and friends. Did he was he fearful of that?
He was fearful of making a bad choice. He was fearful of stepping on someone's toes and having them be mad. I call it management by the last person who left my office. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah, no, it does.
And a lot of managers, leaders are like that. It's whoever screams the loudest gets the decision made in their favor. Whoever leaves their office at the last, and you can't do that. So and also he was struck with a lot of anxiety. But interestingly enough, the more he started making firm decisions and we started accomplishing tasks, his anxiety went down.
See, that seems kind of counterintuitive to me. I guess because this is why I would never be a manager, because honestly I think I would suck at it. Is I would think that as you're making decisions, and some decisions people are going to applaud, and some decisions people are going, oh, that so and so manager, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I think those, and obviously, all that negativity flows up. I mean, you hear about it at some point, right? I would think that would make you even more anxious, that would weigh on you. It's like, oh, I made this decision. Yeah, I had to make it, but God, everybody hates it. I mean, don't they realize it's for the good of the company, but everybody hates me? I would think that would wear you down. I mean, rather than make you feel confident.
Right. It can if that's where you leave it. The key is if we want to accomplish something, like, let's use, cleaning up the corner of the yard. The objective was, in a few minutes, we're going to discuss, I want everyone's input. So you get everyone's input, and then once everything is pretty much settled, the leader makes a decision. Now, if everyone has provided input, that's where the problem usually comes in. It's not, did you take my point of view or his or hers? It's, I want to be heard. And that's where a lot of leaders, when they really want the right decision, it's not my decision or your decision, it's what's the best for the department, what's the best for the organization. And when we start looking at problems in terms of what's best for our team, we make better decisions. And sometimes the decision's going to be wrong. That's why we have to debrief as quickly as possible, reassess, reapply. Okay.
So what I hear you saying there then is, for those managers who would probably be like me, who would approach leadership with a lot of trepidation because they don't want to offend or hurt or that sort of stuff, that you're saying if they are actively requesting information from their employees in terms, getting them involved. It's like, okay, look, here's the problem. I'm going to lay it out for you. We got a problem. Here's what it is. I want everybody's input, and really to pay attention to what those employees are saying. Kind of the whole active listening thing. I guess you could talk about that. That you will know as a manager that, hey, I've done my best to listen to what they've said, and I'm making a decision based on that. And you're saying that usually employees understand that and don't feel as negative, even if it's a decision they don't like, won't feel as negative about it, because at least they feel like, well, I know he heard me, he heard what I had to say. Yeah, it didn't go my way, but at least I know he gave me a chance. Right.
Now, if you're consistent, and this is the key, if you're consistent on always making the right decision for the team, it may be, you might hurt my feelings or your feelings on a decision, but over time that should kind of work its way out, right? Because the boss is saying, I'm making the best decision. Even, it may not even be my decision. It might be somebody else's idea. I just have to make the call. It's like the quarterback who has to make the call. And sometimes the play doesn't go the way we want, but we reassess. The main thing in organizations is involvement. People don't necessarily need to be right all the time, but they want to be involved. And that's the key. Whether we're making a change with 2 people or a large organization, involve your people. And that way people can be heard and they feel like, I had a say in what was said, or I had a say in that decision. A lot of times people will want to inspire their organization, so they give more money. Well, you're not going to get more involvement. You're just going to have richer employees, and you're going to be poorer as an organization. You're not really going to be motivating anyone. Involve them, and they'll go home and tell their spouse, they'll tell their friends, the boss asked my opinion. That's huge. That will really inspire people. Now you don't have 2 or 3 or 5 people in the executive suite making decisions. You have the whole organization trying to solve problems. And that's what we're really trying to achieve in organizations, because really organizations are a series of problems all day long that we're trying to fix. So the more involvement we can get in an effective and an efficient manner, that's the key of leadership, is getting all the best ideas and then saying, okay, boom, we're going to do that. Here's the time frame in which it needs to be done, and then let's reassess and then re-implement.
So kind of what I hear from that is going back to the kind of the intro, lonely at the top. It's only lonely if you don't involve other people in the decision making. I mean,
perfect.
At the end of the day, you have to make the final decision.
Right.
It's going to be up to you. You're the big cheese. You've got to buck dust stop there, and you've got to make your decision. But it doesn't have to be lonely if everybody has been involved in it. You can feel confident that you're making a decision based on input from everybody in the company. And I guess 2 things happen from that. I'm just brainstorming here. 2 things happen from that. Number one, your decisions are going to probably be better because you're getting input from everybody who has a stake in whatever that problem is you're trying to solve. So you're not just getting one side of the issue, you're getting a multitude of sides, and so you can have more data to work with. But so you're probably doing better problem solving, but you're also kind of engendering that sense of we're all in this together. I mean, we're here to solve the problem together.
Right. Now, if it's lonely at the top, it means that you're trying to make all the decisions yourself. Okay. That in and of itself is the problem. And when I go into companies, I often have to work mainly with the chief executive officer and the executive team, because it's usually how they are running the organization. And that person that says, I always have to be right, I always have to have the I always have to have the answer. Well, that's not very empowering. In fact, a lot of times your employees know when you're making mistakes. So it's best just to say, I made a mistake, or this didn't turn out the way we want. How are we going to fix it? So it doesn't have to be lonely. That used to be the management style of what the 40s, 50s, 60s is the boss is always right. Now we don't need to do that. We can have everyone shoulder the burden, but yes, at the end of the day, the leader does have to make that choice. But it's not his or her choice that's made, it's what are we going to do? And I think that's the big thing, is involvement. Just remember that key, involvement, and then address the obvious. I say that a lot to my clients, is address the obvious. So if there's the white elephant in the corner, it's your job to address what is that white elephant. And if everyone's always agreeing with you, you're the white elephant.
Right. And before we go, I mean, so what would be a practical exercise or first step for somebody who's in that position? They're watching the show, they hear, okay, Kelly, you know, what you're saying makes sense, you know, maybe I am taking too much of this on myself, I'm not delegating enough, or I'm not listening enough. What would be your one big piece of advice to leave them with?
I think getting an objective viewpoint, having some, if you do it internal, people aren't going to be honest with you because you have a history with them. Okay. So getting an objective viewpoint from an outside person for them to do a confidential outline in your organization. And it doesn't have to be specific people, but I usually do a random sample on what's really going on in the organization. And I just ask usually 3 to 4 questions. What's going well? What is not going well? Where do you drop in the ball? If we were to, what ideas do you have to fix this? And if we were to apply those, what might the organization look like in 12 to 18 months? And in that, we start figuring out who's doing a good job in leading, who the poor managers are. If it comes from one person, it might just be one person pointing the finger. Right. But if you get 20% of the people in the organization saying Bob is doing an ineffective job, then I might have to look at Bob, you know, more closely. And usually these things come up. So really get a true assessment of where the organization is. Just like when you go to a doctor, that doctor has to do an assessment.
Right.
You know, you might think you know what the problem is, but that's the doctor's job to say, okay, here's what we're dealing with. Let's deal with some facts. And then once we have some facts, then we can decide, do we want to move in this direction? What are the options? And then let's decide if you want to leave it status quo or if you want to take steps to look at yourself. But ultimately, it takes looking in the mirror, especially, you know, we all need to do that, but especially for anyone in an executive position, you need to be honestly looking in the mirror and saying, what can I do to improve not only myself, but those around me? That's really your job, is to improve the functioning of those around you. And that's called service leadership, where don't always have the answer.
Right.
You're serving them and you're making them better, and that's what great coaches are all about. They're not on the court, they're pulling out the best in each of the team members.
Excellent. All right.
Great.
Kelly Graves,
always a pleasure.
Yeah, and take a look. We have your book. Why don't we put up Kelly's book up here on the screen? Kelly has a book. It's been out for a couple years now?
Yeah,
a
couple years. Yeah.
The Management Employee Development Review: Competitive Advantage Through Transformative Teamwork and Evolved Mindsets. And as you can see, Kelly is very, very good at presenting his material. So. Be sure to go check out that book. It's probably available CRC Press and probably also on Amazon?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can get it at Amazon. Punch in my name, Kelly Graves, or the Management and Employee Development Review.
Perfect.
All right.
And so that is it for today. Thanks all of you for joining us. As usual, if there is someone you would like us to bring on the show or some topic, send them to us at qdl@qualitydigest.com. We'll try to cover those topics on the show. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week. So long.